Hello everyone, welcome to our lesson on skies.
Before we start painting, I just want to give you some important tips on skies. If you're painting a clear blue sky, the sky is always its lightest at the horizon, and as you go up it gets darker. Even when your sky is darker, this will still happen. Clouds will get smaller and squashed, flatter, closer to the horizon. So when they're up high in the sky, they become much rounder. When they're on the horizon, they're much flatter. Darker skies create drama and mood in a painting and can be a very powerful background to your subject.
Let's go for our first sky. Things that I would have handy would be cotton tips, a tissue, a soft tissue, not a really cheap hard paper one, and a little bit perhaps of spare clean paper towel or blotting paper. I would also have some big brushes. That's camel hair. I don't use it a lot because I find the camel hair tends to fall out a bit, whereas these two are synthetic nylon and I don't mind them at all.
I use two small round brushes, one slightly larger than the other.
Okay, so first things first, I'm not going to take you through the basics like a graduated wash and a flat wash because there's so many good demonstrations of that out there on the internet already, and I really just want to get to the points where I feel I can really help you. So the first thing I'm going to do is use my largest brush and I'm going to lay down a lot of water on this paper. This is when I'd like to talk quickly about paper. Make sure that you've got a heavier paper, at least 300 GSM weight. So the heavier the paper can hold the water more and will stay wet for longer, which means that you get more time to play and to take out colour, etc. So here are my colours. I'm going to go straight into my Derwent Phthalo Blue. Laying it down on the page. And while I go and put the paint down, I'm actually purposefully missing parts. Now I'm trying to think of as a beginner, I'm moving quicker than you probably would feel like moving because I've got the confidence. So make yourself move a bit faster. Look at how this water is just puddling and I have no control over that and I don't need any control over that. I'm putting a few marks on now and can you see how the page isn't wet enough anymore because I'm getting a hard edge. Now, if I was a beginner, that would make me panic. I'd be worried that everything's drying, I'm making marks I don't want to, I haven't put enough water down. So what I want to talk to you about is that beginner mindset and things to do. So I've got my clean water here. I have two water jars always. One I use straight away with the stronger colour so it gets quite murky quickly, and the other one stays quite clean. So looking at this, I can see first problem to be fixed is just wet your brush and run over any area where you feel you've created a hard edge and you don't want a hard edge. If you've got marks that you're not quite happy with, that's why we've got our cotton tips and our tissue paper here. Just feel free to roll it around, dab it, but you might want to keep using one just anywhere you see a hard edge. The other thing to do is just to get a smaller brush and do the same thing with that smaller brush. So make sure you've got a nice clean brush and you can just run around edges where you feel that there might be a little bit too much hard, dry edge. And rub. It's a sand shoe, not a stiletto. We are laying down the bristles flat to the page. We're not spiking the page. You can pull in some of the colour because it's wet. You can dab in a little bit of colour and just drop it in. Now, talking about dropping in colour, from the top here, if I want to drop in more colour and go, hey, that's not enough for my liking, I might go into a cobalt blue, which is this colour here, the Daler-Rowney cobalt blue. And I am just Remember I talked in the canal video about loading the brush? It means pushing the bristles in and lifting it up so that until it's just about to drip, that is as much pigment and water as that brush can actually hold. And now this is less of a sand shoe because I literally want gravity to pull that off my brush and down onto the page. And then I'll clean that out. You could even go for a more dramatic sky if you wanted and throw a little bit of ultramarine in there. It's honestly, it's up to you how you lay the colours down on a sky. But what I suggest is keep the top part of the sky darker. Then as you work down towards, say how horizon is here, we want to make the colour get less and less intense. So we want not only for it to be a little bit lighter, we want it to be less vibrant and pretty, and we also want shorter, squattier clouds. So I'm going back into my cobalt because it's a little bit less vibrant than the phthalo that we used in the beginning. And I'm just going to do little long dots and dashes here. I'm kind of, in my head, I'm kind of thinking I want them to stay a little bit horizontal, not big rounded shapes. The rounded shapes are towards the top and the top half of the sky, but down the bottom, because clouds get squattier and smaller the further they are away from you, so as perspective works, the horizon is at least 3.8 kilometres away, which is, you know, over about 2 miles, I think, or maybe less, but it's a long way away. So as we're getting down to the horizon, it seems fit that we are looking at clouds that are further away from us. So we want to have more horizontality in our cloud formations, and we want the height to be squished down. So there's a scale that's happening as we go down the page. Now, I'm back into my beginner what if mindset. What if I do something and it's too heavy down here and I look and I go, oh no, that's when your tissue comes in. So I tend to just do a regular sort of a scrunch, and I'll look at it and I can gently touch and take out a little bit, or I can really dab and rotate onto a drier bit of tissue and I can take out quite a bit. Try not to rub because the surface of the paper will get affected. Another beginner thing that may happen is I've got an area here that's too wet. What do? Well, I can let it dry, and in its own time, it will dry and it will cause a hard edge here, which is like a tide line. It's called cauliflowering because of that edge. But what I can do is make sure that your brush is not too wet, but it's got a little bit of moisture, so I might just dab that onto the tissue. And now what I'm going to do is with the softest pressure, I'm just going to shimmy around right over the top of that line so that I'm going a little bit onto one side and a little bit onto the other side. And I can leave it at that. This here is puddling. I honestly, because for me the sky is a loose, free part of the painting, I really like when these little things happen because I haven't controlled it. But if you don't like it, this is how to get rid of it. Wipe the moisture with the colour on it from your brush straight onto your tissue paper, and you can gently dab areas, or remember, perhaps a cotton tip would be better. You can pick the area and go, I don't like that line there, and you can literally press down quite firmly and repeatedly, moving the head of your cotton tip, and you can take the colour off that way. The first thing to think about is laying something down. And I know that takes a lot longer than what I've just done because you're hesitating, you're not sure, you don't want to ruin your paper. I should have used a heavier paper because this is buckling a little bit. I did really put a lot of water on there though. But what you don't want to do as a beginner is what I've been saying to you, but completely repeat while it is drying. So I can see a great big puddle there. And this is good because the page is puckered up here. I've got a puddle here, I've got a little puddle here, I've got some line forming here that's a bit heavy. But at this stage, as a beginner, panic sets in really quickly. and that's not your fault. First thing, allow puddles to sit and just keep an eye on them. You may be able to use that to your benefit, but who knows? Let's just wait and see. What I don't want to happen is a big heavy line come in here, because a line, just a line of blue, doesn't make sense to me in my sky, but a big darker patch of blue might. So I might think about redoing a heavier wash over this once it's dry. Don't panic about things that aren't completely dry yet, because even when they are dry, you can re-wet an area and lift it off. It's almost just your brain's reaction to not having the control that, or the desired outcome that you might have immediately wanted. But at the moment, it's not giving me too much strength. I've got a little bit of strength up here, but now here I'm quite weak. So what I'm going to do is, with my smaller round brush, I'm just going to wet with clean water, clean brush, clean water, wet an area that runs slightly further than what you think you want to put a bit of blue sky into. So I've gone this shape here, and I really just want to work in a little wider here and then come in a little narrower here. I'm going to go back to my cobalt purely to hit some colour so you can see what I'm working in. Cobalt is a very soft, recessive blue. It won't jump forward at you like the prettiness of phthalo. But you see here how I'm being more, even though I'm going wet into wet, I'm being slower and I'm being much more controlling and decisive about the marks I'm making. I really want this on the edge to be higher, because I feel like the cloud will look like it's in part of my scene if I close it off a little bit. And now, using my brush at sort of, say this is the page here, I'm not a sandshoe and I'm not a stiletto, but I'm about 35 to 40, 45 degrees. That's the angle. So I'm using gravity to help the colour run off the tip of my brush onto the page. Most of the clouds that I want to try and show have got a fluffy, I think it's called a cumulus. It's a bubbly, fluffy top and a flatter bottom. So on this bottom part here, I can do ups and downs and little dots here that might join up and run up, but I don't mind. This part, honestly, is practice, and believe me, some of the practice involves taking photos or staring into the sky to look at different cloud formations. I have to say, I've had years and years of painting skies, so I have confidence that the shapes that I make are believable to be clouds. If some of your problem is, I don't know how to do the little dots and dashes, then yours isn't a painting problem, it's an observation problem, and you need to study and observe clouds so that you can copy their structure. I'll just quickly grab, this is one of my calendars, but look at the shapes here.
Clouds can really be the weirdest shapes.
Just be aware that, it's not all just how to paint, it's how to become a better observer. How do I see things better so that I can then represent them better? So that one is really, really subtle. While this is still wet, I hope you can see that that's a bit damp. Yes, okay. So while that's a little bit wet, I'm going to go in and use my darker version, which is my Derwent Payne's Grey. So here's my Derwent Payne's Grey. I'm grabbing the tiniest amount, and I'm going to just, look at how weak that is. I'm even going to water that down a bit. But I'm going to load my brush up with that, and I'm going to head right into the centre of that area and go kind of flat, but maybe a little bit up and down. Can you see straight away that because that's a heavier pigment and it's the different colours, it's given me a lot of attention to the weight at the bottom of that cloud. So when I look over here at this shape that I really like, I don't want to alter that shape too much, but it just isn't strong enough to hold this amount of white fluffy cloud on top of it without being more shadowy. So with saying that, I'm going to clean off my brush again, leaving it quite wet and just dipping it in the water. I'm going to, remember, think of this as a country. You want to wet over the top. Now this is sandshoe stuff, flat. I don't want to lift this paint off. I want to just re-wet it. And try and do big sweeping movements, not lots of little brush strokes. If your brush is running dry, dip into the water, back, sand shoe, very low, 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 and I'm going out past the borders of that country. I'm going to dip back into my Derwent Payne's grey, which was my lovely neutral, slightly bluish grey. And this time I've got a little bit more weight in there, but I still have diluted it quite a bit. I'm going to go right in the centre now and look at what's happening. It's moving on its own. It's beautiful. I might put a bigger bubbly a bit there, come down. Not much here, and a few dabs over here. And for that, I might just let it sit and see what happens. Already this is softening and running out because I've added that water. This is a bit harsh, so I may get my little cotton tip. I'll just see. And also, I'm standing up for this painting because if I'm too close, you know, we're painting a huge panoramic sky here, and I can't look at it as individual little sections. So standing up as a beginner, or if you're at an easel, walking away just one step away and turning and looking at it from a little bit more distance is really beneficial because you actually can see the effect of too much or too little far easier than if you're stuck right in the center of it. Now look at this good little area here. It's gone really hard and sharp, not what I wanted, and so it is here as well. I don't want that either. So I have two choices. I know as a beginner you'd be panicking again. I totally understand that, but remember this is practice and you're failing upwards. So here I've got a damp brush. I'm just going to put the old flat sand shoe over that and see if I can rub a few times. And there you go, rubbing gently, and I've gotten rid of that one. I'll try that effect again, but I'm going to really hone in on this edge. I don't mind so much the tone of it. I quite like how dark it is. So I'm running that nice rubbing, smooth, slow, interrupting that border. If you have the opportunity, remember as a beginner you don't tend to move your page around, but if you do, please do so. Really feel it will benefit you, and being more confident will just lead to having more enjoyment with your painting. That's what I'm trying to get through. I might dip my brush into the water a bit more. The reason why I don't want to absolutely pour water onto this area is because like that's too much water. I'm going to lift some off. Because if I get it too wet, it's just going to cauliflower edge. Now, as I said before, I kind of like the old cauliflower edging, but you might really not like it at all. So use some paper towel, wipe the moisture out of your brush, and just gently, 2 or 3 rubs, and see how I'm already softened that. Don't keep rubbing on the one line, rub above it and below it. Move the page to where it matches, suits your hand. If I do this, I might do this to show you actually. I'm going to get a pretty tight little scrunched area, so I'm pushing it into place. It's a tight little area. So I'm kind of looking at it knowing that this top bit of the scrunchy area is going to hit first, and I'm aiming for that to go right into that little area. I'm pressing really heavy, and I've just stopped that from being able to cauliflower because I've softened it all off. So you have lots and lots of control with these skies. Now, the cauliflower that's happened up here, I'm loving it. If you're not, as I said before, you know now, you re-wet this edge and just dab straight away, or you may get away with just re-wetting it gently and rubbing gently and then dispersing that line. This is a good opportunity to think, as a beginner, you don't know how much is too much and how much isn't enough. Well, I'm assuming, but you know, it's hard. That's what being a beginner is. You don't know. What I'm thinking of is if you squint through your eyelashes, you can only see, you don't see all the detail, then you just see blots of tone and colour. And what I don't like when I'm squinting is I'm just drawn to this dark patch right in the middle. And there's white around it, and then there's nothing. I see a tiny bit of blue at the bottom. Remember, you don't want things that haven't got any power for your painting to hold your attention. That is holding my attention. Now, And another option is perhaps I could darken some of this sky. Now, I usually darken one side of the top rather than both and grade down. Perhaps load a little bit more onto this side because I intend later to darken over here, and I feel like this is a bit of a weak patch now. So we might try that as well as do this. So first of all, I'm going to redo what I did here. Remember, we watered outside of the blue shape. So I've got like a really soft, nothing kind of blue shape here. I'm going to go way outside of it with my wet brush. And I'm going to go back to my Payne's grey. And I'm going to, again, keeping it sort of horizontal, but missing a few areas, just put a few dabs in. And then continue to do that, but a little bit smaller wet shape. I might even blend that in a bit. Tiny, look how little colour I'm actually using. And now they're not just dashes, but they're sort of drags horizontally. Very flat, smaller scale, cloudy shapes. And because I don't want hard lines there, I've wet my brush, I've wiped off the excess, and now 1, 2 little rubs, and that's turned into a soft blend. Here I'll do the same and wipe off the excess moisture. So I'll continue to do that over here. Pick an area that's got a little bit of colour, re-wet it. Now, to change things up a bit, I might go back into my cobalt blue just a little bit to show that, hey, there's more blue sky coming through here. Not all cloud, tiny bits of colour. Don't go crazy with the colour on the bottom half. Keep the crazy vibrance up the top. But remember, you can, if you do the wet first, like wet on wet, you can always dab it back. So now, one of the things about being a beginner is you tend to get caught up in what you're doing and don't have the patience just to stop and let the paper dry. So this is a good time to actually remind yourself of that and maybe perhaps do a practice keeping that in mind. So I'll go back to my my round brush with the tip, and I'm just going to lay down quite a bit of water yet again. Remember, wet on wet is always the easiest way to go with skies. Even if you're mixing, well, especially if you're mixing, mixing up your colours, changing your colours. So I've got back here, I've got my original, my lovely phthalo blue, so I'll put some of that in. The reason why I've gone to that is because I put cobalt in before and it was just too soft now, so I want to jazz it up a little bit more. See here where I didn't wet the page enough? It's gone hard already. So what do? I clean my brush off, I take out most of the moisture, I flatten it to the page, and I just run it along. So here I'm adding my Payne's grey while my phthalo blue is still drying. And look, just to show you, I'll put way too much on, like way too much. See how I'm still going kind of horizontally? And I might even go up where there's no moisture on the page. Like if I don't go crazy out there, then how am I going to teach you what to do and what not to do? So I'm just going to go a bit ballistic with that. Now, what I would do straight away if I'd gone, oh no, I've done too much, I've made it, crazy. Again, clean the brush of colour, wet it, absorb it into the paper just a touch, and where you have those edges, keep your brush, like look how I'm pushing it down so that almost 2/3 of the bristle are actually on the paper. That's how much I'm squishing it down to the page. And I'm just rubbing all around the edges. And now with a drier brush and just a little bit of colour, I can add in some bottoms of clouds, a little bit more detail. I'm going to let this dry up here, this shape that's really not cloud-like, that I just say I haven't gotten to it in time, Didn't see it, it's really late, I'm just a beginner, I didn't notice. But I'm really glad now, if you can look at the whole thing, I'm glad this has got more punch to it, more oomph. It makes me think that this needs to be heavier. So what I'll do is, again, remember if the page dries completely, you have the freedom then of re-wetting gently, not too many dabs, but a nice slide. And you have that ability to go, right, I'll just throw in some more Payne's grey. So the important thing is, I can't stress enough, wet out past where you think you'll want your colour to sit. This area here, if I wet it with this smaller brush, that's a big area for this brush. So it means that I increase my chances of disturbing the surface of the paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a bigger brush, quite wet. Might be too wet, yeah. So see that? It's leaving a big drop on my finger. That's too wet. So rather than dab it, I'll just wipe it off on the edge of the bottle. And I'm going to, remember when you're re-wetting an area up the top, you've got two clean borders that doesn't matter how bad it looks. So work from the borders across, in. So I might go to there, again from the border in, from the border in. So my main purpose here is to introduce a slightly darker colour, and that might be my ultramarine blue, with a bit of the last bit of cobalt, I guess. Load the brush up, and yeah, see how nice that's going to sit in there? I'm not going to go all the way to the edge. I'm just going to let it sit, puddle, do what it may. In fact, I might take that all the way over. If I get a line there, I'll keep an eye on it and wet it as I go. So now we've got this situation here. So what can I do? I can really, really work at it and wet it and pull it back, but just let's say I don't want to do that. What I can do is the same old thing again. Wet outside of where you had it. Add in more of your sky colour. So you're kind of creating this interest of, oh, there's more blue sky there, but you're filling in the lighter gaps around. Now I've taken the moisture off my brush, and I'm just rubbing a drier brush, which is blurring off that edge because I went too far. Then here I'm just going to softly blend it in. Derwent Payne's Grey, dab, dab. I might take that all the way out, like that's really a heavier cloud. So, as a beginner, you can overwork things. If you're making that mistake, that's fine, because the more experience you get, the more you'll quickly realise you're overworking it. I'm going to put tinted water on here, you see. Really wet the page again, but I'm purposefully not wetting a great big cloud shape. Okay? You'll see it in a minute because I'll surround it with some other colour. But this is a good thing for you to practice. So here I'm going to go into bolder colour. I'm going to use my Dale Rowney Phthalo Blue. And this is the free, fun part. I really want you to practice this as well. So I'm really throwing some paint on this page. Might even dip a bit into the Prussian. Now, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to just tip the paper up so that it runs. Let it run. Run this way. See, I'm controlling where it's running. I had too much that side. Then I can hit it with my brush a little bit and help control that way. Okay, back that way. If I get a hard edge, I'm just using my very wet brush to soften it off. Have it to run more. This is really, really using watercolour at its best, I guess. And I just want it to be focusing on that one cloud shape. So, and you can turn that paper around any which way you want until the paint is settling where you want it to settle. Now, I don't want it to dip into that little hole too much, so I'll move it around. It's that wet that I can just really move it around. In fact, let's do some funny things here. I might put more Prussian in. Now along the bottom here, I'm going to wet the bottom of the cloud. And I might put Payne's Grey in. But see, I'm not being cautious now. I'm really just throwing the paint on. This is the part of watercolour that, you know, you just need to give yourself up to, because organised thinking, like we did with the first one, is not your best friend in this case. It's kind of going to slow you down, pull you out of your fun zone. And I'm loving what's happening here. This is too repetitive, so now my sensibility from the first exercise is going to be my friend, and I'm going to just soften that off the tiniest bit. because I know if I do that wet brush run, bang, I'll leave that gap, leave that gap. I'll rub off this really hard edge here because I want this to be the bottom of the cloud. And if I go in with quite a dry brush, so I've really pat it dry, I know I can suck paint up off the paper. So I can keep doing that. See the paper, the colour that's coming up? If I'm impatient, I don't want it to puddle and I just want to even the paint out. I go into my valleys and I just suck the paint out. Now, that to you may be very stressful, but honestly, if you can push yourself to do that, the reason why I did this loose one second, not first, as you might think I would have, is because you gain a bit of insight and confidence here. And that's really good to have under your belt. Every time you do a painting, you're learning, you're gaining some strength in some way. And then, right after that one, jump in to do a crazy fun one like this, and you'll find that you will be more daring than you ever thought you could be. Just time to have fun and experiment. And the next lesson, we're going to start adding colours and get into some lovely sunrise and sunset skies. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. See you next week, and be creative.